And I want to ask you, Jamin, a little bit about the distribution platform, because it's something that I've not had any real understanding or integration or involvement with in the cannabis industry. We see so much from the soil side and dealing with all our farmer friends. And that's one piece that's kind of been an elusive thing that we don't talk about a lot. So can you fill me in and teach me a little bit about how the whole distribution networks really work here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love talking about distribution. In a lot of sense, there's parallels with distribution and just doing distribution and selling something, like pretty much, the ability to take something from a producer, package it, spread it out, often is cases, and bring it out to multiple dispensaries or things. There's something to be said a lot about the network and how that starts to get built over time and who you kind of align yourself with. Because I think one of the things in distribution is there's a lot of product lines, and a lot of different people have sort of gone into distribution looking at, like, how do I create a catalog of all the brands where I can go into a shop and give them everything. Where as we've done distribution over time, we've started to look at how we can kind of fine tune things that are in Southern Oregon that we have access to and bring them up to urban markets, and try to focus on kind of getting the products where they don't normally exist, where producers are, and getting them into areas where we can bring them into and get them into people's hands that are new. And we've come into some real big challenges where we don't currently have traditional cash where we can transfer between businesses with banking and different things that have been invented in that way, and we don't have ability to use shipping and UPS and FedEx, and so we've had to reinvent a lot of the wheel, which sounds kind of strange, where we have, like, typically in distribution, you'll have a sales team that does a lot of the actual delivery, and you'll have them be the ones that are often the brand ambassadors. So salespeople start in distribution and cannabis start to become kind of like one of your most important people in the whole system, I would say, in the whole network. And then pairing them up with somebody who can kind of keep them efficient in the field is really important too, where sometimes I'll do like a 1-to-4 ratio, and sometimes I'll do like a 1-to-2 ratio, where I'll have like multiple people who are running the computer systems and running the metric and being able to check product in and check stuff out of the warehouse, and setting them up so that they can do these things called circular manifests, where they would run around doing stop after stop of showing things and then circling back and then doing the deliveries at those stops too. So what we typically do is we'll take on a brand, like maybe what I could do to talk a little bit about how the flow works is, like a brand will typically call, we have an 800 number online, or they'll come through one of like our websites and saying, hey, we've got a product that we want you to bring, and we'll do kind of an introductory meeting with them and start to learn about their business. And if there's a good fit, we'll find like some of our partner dispensaries that we can start to bring the product to, like maybe about 4 to 6 dispensaries, and start with a test market and say, like, how's the price point of this product? How is it packaged? Because sometimes we'll find brands that are a great fit, but they just need a little bit of fine tuning around packaging or a price point, or how they are actually brought out in with other products, where we can pair them a little bit. So that's been really interesting to try to work in those areas. And I found that with genetics, it gives you a really, you can diversify farms with different genetics that you bring them. So there'll be different partnered groups that we have seed production with in Oregon, and we'll try to work with a farm and give them some specific genetics. I just did this with high desert flower, where we gave them 4 strains. They're their exclusives, and now as they start to produce those, people will start to recognize them as part of their brand, which I think is really interesting to do.
I agree. I think that consistency in branding is super important. And I'm director of brand development at Royal Gold, and so we deal with distribution in such a different way than you have to. You're like talking about these hurdles, like, wow, I can't imagine having to network and consolidate internally the way cannabis distribution is. Like, we rely on our distribution partners to go out there and tell people about our product, and we throw it on a truck and it goes and lands for the distributor. And we have dozens and dozens of sales reps all over the country that are acting as kind of a proxy for our brand, but aren't employed by our brand. And it's really interesting that there's so many more hurdles to that in the cannabis world. Once again, why is it so much harder for us or for the people doing this in cannabis than a traditional business? I just can't wrap my head around why these hurdles keep being placed on every stage.
I know, and a lot of times you'll say the hurdles are, the ability to transport stuff with traditional methods, trucking, other vendors and people that can just do distribution that way and ship things in boxes and put them in the postal stream. And then you'll find like, oh, it's the banking and the money, but there's also a real inconsistency with product too, where an amazing farm might have a bad batch. And it's kind of created a scenario where almost everything needs a hands-on approach to whether the decision's made on whether they take it, whether they're going to pass on that, whether they're going to pay one price or another, and even whether they might have a similar strain. Like we've been in situations where we've come into a dispensary and they'll have a pretty common strain, GMO or something on the shelf already. And they'll say, hey, we've already got GMO. We want to sell through this first before we bring your GMO in. And it could even be a GMO from outdoor and ours could be a GMO from indoors. It could be totally different, but it confuses the customers, when they come in and want that GMO. So it's one of the most important positions when you're running a dispensary is getting a good buying manager who really understands who the people are in the industry, what they do, and is willing to kind of take the time to sort of like look at every step of the way and make those decisions. In the early days, we try, you try things. You say, let's try to make a traditional wholesale company. Like, let's use a selling platform. Let's go online. Let's build a platform where people can go in, they can do e-commerce orders, they'll just show up. And we found it failed actually early on, and we built probably multiple versions of e-commerce platforms and said to our vendors like, hey, you can always order online, you can get things. And now we've even seen groups that are like bigger and that's all they focus on. Like LeafLink is a pretty big platform now that sells things through kind of like an Amazon where you pay $300 a month. They give you a listing. A lot of the dispensaries will go on LeafLink and look, see the products that are, but they start to break when it comes to flower specifically. Yeah, you can get a very similar vape or a pretty similar edible product, but how is the flower, really going to be distinct? What's the terpene profile? Did they cure it right? How does this grow? Did they have bugs? And those things are really hard to tell without actually sniffing the bag, seeing the bag, holding it up. What's the appeal like and getting it in front of you? So a lot of the decisions buying managers make are really in person. They're split moment decisions. They probably take, about 15 to 20 minutes a lot of times with our salesperson. They'll make the decision and then literally invoices are being done, cash is being handed back and forth. There's definitely times where we'll get people net 30s. It's pretty standard now as people are established, we trust them. But that little 30-minute of time frame is where in a normal industry, maybe 4 or 5 different parts of the business would have all functioned. There would have been shipping involved. There would have been e-commerce orders. We don't have any of that really in place. So in a way, it's like we're reinventing the wheel in cannabis distribution, but we're also looking at distribution on how can we make this a little bit more personal? How can we solve some of these problems that don't exist, when everything's just kind of looked at as a cog, just as like a widget, because they're not. And so like in cannabis, we see, trim, bee-bud, those start to fall in those categories, but people are really hands-on and it's amazing. And I think having a really good salesperson that can talk about those things and the testing results and everything there and creating that presentation is important.
You were saying having a really good salesperson and a big part of it is trying product first. And that's what I've seen to be one of the biggest, hand tying part of this whole thing is just, the inability to sample product. There's so many stipulations on being able to give away free product in cannabis. I don't know if it's like that in Oregon. I know in California, that's definitely
you can't just roll into a farm producer and like do on-site cannabis tastings.
Right.
They can't just like say, oh, here, try these 6 strains here, and that is a huge hurdle. And I feel like so many other products like wine and other categories of products are so much more stable than flour.
Yeah.
And that's a really big hurdle too. Like, you can look at it, it smells great, it tastes great, smoke some, we're good. When was it harvested? How much more shelf life do I have? How is this particular genetic going to hold up on its terpene profiles? How's it going to hold up on its THC numbers? And, you're printing these numbers on a bag or on a, prepackaged, especially in California, because we've discussed that it's a prepackaged state. Yep. Is that holding up 6, 12 months down the road? Is that actual percentage still real? Because from the day you cross, it's right around 30 days, that curing platform, those numbers start to dive.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you bring up, how stuff degrades and changes. So, in Oregon, we're going to get this initial test result, but has it been in the rep's vehicle? Has it been driven around the state? Have they really done the utmost care in terms of, like, maybe they went into the diner and forgot to run the AC and it got kind of hot in the trunk, or in the van where they had AC and they had sort of like climate control, but then it broke that one day or something. So we had a situation where we've had to replace some gummies, and there's certain times where we have to be really cautious about how we transport stuff, but the profiles will change going back to the testing. Like, doesn't CBN start to, manifest after heat and time and different sort of, like, literally the test results are probably going to change, not just the terpene profile. And I think what's happened in Oregon is a real freshness elements occurred in the last couple years, where I think there was always kind of like, it's last year's harvest scenario, maybe for the outdoor folks. We've done a lot of work around preservation and curing, and maybe even going as far as doing nitrogen packing or argon gases or different things that are going to stabilize it. But the big shift that I've seen is freshness. And I think that the shops that purchase generally lose interest after 2 or 3 months of a flour product. After, you'll continually go back and you'll literally, as a wholesaler, start lowering prices as stuff sat there after a couple of months of, like, how do we get this out the door? How do we take stuff that was 22 for top shelf indoor, bring it down to 18 and start running it out? Because we know that producer has another batch that's getting trimmed right now. So the freshness element, it's tied in now, not just to the producers and them who are trying to get things done in a timely manner and out the door and off the farm and into distribution and into shops, but the actual wholesalers now are starting to really take those precautions and do things like climate controlled rooms, putting in air conditioners in places for product versus people, and putting climate controlled vans out on the road, and trying to really be conscious of these elements. But there's nothing really beats just doing it fast, is what I found. It's just getting the product in, finding the right amount, spreading it around so that there aren't situations where you've got 20 pounds that are sitting in Southern Oregon, but they only want 5 and the other 15 are needed up north.